Thank you very much. There was a little delay because I'm walking a little slower, but I'm glad to get up here. Vicki, and to all the members of the Kennedy family here tonight, Madam Speaker, to all my colleagues in the Congress, members of the Cabinet, and very, very distinguished guests, friends of Ted Kennedy all. This is a remarkable gathering of an amazing group of people who, one way or the other, crossed paths with Ted, worked for him, were part of his life, and for whom he worked diligently. And many of you have come here tonight appropriately to say thank you. I can't tell you how excited I am about this concept, and I mean that. From the moment Vicki and Paul Kirk called me about it, and Jack Connors and others, this is really an exciting possibility, if you will. And it's going to be a reality, but the possibilities are yet still to be fully defined. And I think that, you know, Charlie Gibson was sitting next to me a moment ago, and we were talking about his perceptions of the changes in the news media and the way people get information and how we try to build consensus in America. And it occurs to me that just listening to him say that underscores the importance of what we're here to do and what we're going to be doing over these next months with this institute that honors Ted Kennedy with his name, but is not just about Ted Kennedy. It's about the institution of the United States Senate. And if you read those brilliant first 300 pages of Robert Caro's book about the Senate, the Master of the Senate, that's as good a description as you get, and this institute is going to bring that alive. And the President a moment ago talked about how Ted Kennedy sort of would bring the Senate alive. And I have to tell you, there are so many ways in which I think this institute, I'm not going to talk about all the bills and the legislation, the ways in which others will tonight talk about what this institute can bring alive. But what it can also do is help people to understand how this place really does work, how you make things happen. And Ted was the master of that. He really was. Knowing when to rant and rave, knowing when to cajole, knowing when to twist an arm, knowing when to plead. And he always worked it in his brilliant way, and people need to understand that. He worked everybody hard, but never as hard as he worked himself. And I will tell you that he always kept us laughing, and I hope that the Institute, I'm confident that it will properly put on display that component of the personal relationships which are in the end the way you get things done. I can remember one night on the floor of the Senate, we were back in the cloakroom, and Teddy was regaling us with one of those great stories, and people were all sort of eyes agog and staring at him and listening, and he was getting wound up like this, and the President of the Senate said, "Order, order in the Senate and in the cloakroom." I think it was the only time in 26 years I ever heard that. But, you know, there was just that personal relationship, the way in which he had fun legislating and brought the place alive. I'll give you just another example, if I can. Frankly, some of his practical jokes were as legendary as his legislative accomplishments. And I remember one Thursday night, after a long, long debate, we'd all missed our flights home. And Frank Lautenberg had chartered an airplane and was going back, and you know, he kindly came up to Teddy and to me and to Claiborne Pell, and we were all going up in the same direction. He offered us a ride, and we took the ride, and we went home, and everything was great. And the next week we come back, and we're walking around on the floor of the Senate. And suddenly delivered to us through the pages are a series of bills with Frank Lautenberg's name on them. And each bill was higher than the next. You know, mine was pretty high, and I thought it was outrageous. But Claiborne Pell, who never got excited about anything in his life, came raging down the aisle, and he's sputtering, and he's going like this, you know. He said, "It was just a little airplane with two propellers that went like this." and you know, and he presents me, and he shows me this bill, and I look at it, and it's outrageous, and it has Frank Lautenberg's name on it. Well, then I spied out of the corner of my eye, up there in the corner, Ted Kennedy was just looking at us smiling, this Cheshire cat smile, loving every moment of it because Ted Kennedy had gotten a hold of Frank Lautenberg Stationery, and he sent us those bills. And it's just, you know, it's a classic, Ted, but it's the way people sort of built a relationship and had affection. I'll just leave you with one last story, and it's much more legislative, but it really does tell you a lot about it. And John Sweeney is here, and he'll remember this as well as anybody around. You know, you know, more than 300 bills written exclusively by him became law, as we know. But nothing was more his passion than fighting to raise the minimum wage. He was constantly leading the charge on that. And in 1996, he pushed the Congress to pass a bill increasing the minimum wage to $5.15 an hour. And he did so despite a vow from then Majority Leader Robert Dole, literally, Ted Kennedy will not get the minimum wage passed while I'm in the Senate. And in fact, Dole was right, but not the way that he thought. Vote after vote, debate after debate, Ted found a way legislatively to keep bringing this issue back up. And in the end, Robert Dole was forced to decide that he couldn't run for President of the United States and be Majority Leader at the same time, and so he resigned. And I'll tell you, to this day, Ted Kennedy made that happen, and it didn't get any easier for Trent Lott, his successor, because Ted kept complaining about the inaction on the minimum wage bill, so much so that Trent said to reporters, Ted Kennedy does not rule the world, literally, the quote. And within a few weeks, he saw the error of his ways. He eventually conceded, we've got to get the minimum wage bill off the floor so it doesn't block everything else. And the way they got it off the floor was exactly the way Ted Kennedy had set out a strategy to get it off the floor. We passed it, and it went to the president, and it became law. And that's the way Teddy worked. Now, the story doesn't end there. For future legislators to learn, Ted Kennedy went right back to work for another 10 years, fighting to get the next increase. And finally, in 2007, he succeeded in raising the minimum wage again to $5.85. And then there was this, you know, he did it with the help of California Congressman George Miller, and there was this tremendous rally out in front of the Russell office building, and Teddy was there celebrating the passage of it. And George recalls this. Ted was still clasping his hands, raised at the rally, and he leaned over and he whispered in the middle of this jubilation, he says to George Miller, I'm introducing a new bill to increase the minimum wage. And George looked at him and said, Ted, we haven't even finished celebrating. And Ted said, I know, but we got to move on this. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we got to move on this. We got to get this institute together so people can understand how this extraordinary institution, it is known as the greatest deliberative body in the world. There are times when we obviously fall short, but there are great moments, and I believe we're building up to one now. I thank Terry Murray and the others in the state of Massachusetts who helped to deliver on Ted's last public wish, that we get that 60th senator in the United States Senate. And what a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to have Paul Kirk there, who carries with him so much of Ted Kennedy for this fight that we are engaged in, and on these great issues of Afghanistan, war and peace, climate change, and everything else. That's what the Senate's about at its best, and that's what you're going to see in these next months. And this institute is going to bring it alive for school kids, for scholars, for future members of the Senate and others, for generations to come. I can't think of anything more worthwhile. I thank you for being part of it. We have to move on this. Thank you.